Greetings and welcome to the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving webinar, the intersection of cannabis legalization and road safety. What's next for impaired driving? My name is Darrin Grondel. I'm the Vice President of Government Relations and Traffic Safety for Responsibility.org and also the Director of the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving. I'll serve as today's moderator for our webinar. Thank you for attending this webinar today, where we have over 850 people registered for this webinar. Now, I hope all 850 of you show up for this, but we're just grateful for the attention and the interest in this particular topic. The National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving, known as NASID, is a broad coalition of stakeholders working on a public-private partnership focused to end all forms of impaired driving, especially multi-substance impaired driving. Our members represent a variety of disciplines identified on this slide. Our ultimate goal is to eliminate impaired driving from any substance or substances to save lives. Just as an emphasis for right now is today's webinar is on cannabis. It's our topic for today. However, NASID as a coalition prioritizes drug driving and particularly multi-substance impairment, from alcohol, illicit substances, prescribed medications, over-the-counter meds that can impair. However, but NASID is not centric and focused just on cannabis, but on all substances. To learn more about us, please visit www.nasid.org and consider joining us and signing up for updates in this work of impaired driving. Today, we have a distinguished panel, and I will introduce them alphabetically. Andrew Bennett, who's the director of the newly formed Clark County Office of Traffic Safety in Las Vegas, Nevada. Prior to his current role, he worked in traffic safety for 12 years, including time at the Nevada Office of Traffic Safety. He is working now to pioneer a systems plus approach to traffic safety as Las Vegas prepares to open cannabis lounges. Next is Austin Bernstein, the director of the Attorney General Alliance Cannabis Project, and is responsible for studying the latest developments in cannabis law and policy, educating state attorneys general on the issue and convening forums to discuss and collaborate with key stakeholders. Annie Kitch is a senior policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislatures, identifying and analyzing state safety legislation, and supports the National Conference of State Legislators on other partners on road safety improvement efforts. Russ Martin is a senior director of policy and government relations for the Governor's Highway Safety Association, or GHSA, a national expert on behavioral traffic safety issues. Russ represents the state highway safety offices before federal agencies and Congress and works closely with partners to improve road safety. And I want to thank all of them for being on our panel today. Just to kind of give you a little format of how things will work today, is each panel member has a particular slide with some resources and information that they will share, and then we'll have more of a discussion on some of the issues. But first, I would love to take the time to roll out our new tool here, which is launching an inventory of state cannabis laws as they relate to DUI and underage consumption. This inventory can serve as a valuable resource for policymakers and stakeholders as they look at what improvements may need to be made to effectively reduce impaired driving and youth consumption. The link to this resource is at nasid.org. Click on the state-by-state tab, info tab at the top, then click on the cannabis law state of your choice, and you will see the two tabs show up. There's one called state laws and another one which is cannabis laws. The state laws is kind of an inventory that we've had previously addressing all of the state DUI laws, and we've created this new tool to address all of the cannabis DUI laws. We had to do that because the old form couldn't take the new stuff in, so that's why there's two different tabs. Click on that, and there's a whole list of items there that analyze cannabis DUI laws in various states. The other nice feature of this tool is that you have at the top there, you can share this data. You might see that little envelope there. You can share this information. Responsibility.org and NASID would like to thank Lee Axtell of Traffic Safety Partners for creating this resource with us. Chris Konchak and Christiana Falcon from Responsibility.org who really did a yeoman's job of finalizing this product with each of the states. And let me tell you, it was not easy. So thank you for all your work. We also have a special thanks to all of the state highway safety offices and the traffic safety resource prosecutors around the country for helping to confirm the accuracy of this information. Now, we know with as much as how things are changing that this is a living document. So please let us know if there are any changes in your state as we continue to provide this resource and tool as accurate as we can. So thank you for that. And now I would like to turn the time over to Austin Bernstein.
Thank you, Darrin. I mean, I wish everybody could join me in a virtual round of applause for the work that you all have done, not only to put on today, but to put out that resource. I know quite well what it means to get into the patchwork system of laws that we have. So I really want to thank you. The resource that I wanted to bring is before you here, but real briefly about the Attorney General Alliance. If you don't know us, we're an educational nonprofit. Our members are 47 of the state attorneys general office. We convene forums for discussion on a variety of different issues, cannabis being one of them, but we're completely bipartisan and we don't take a position on whether cannabis legalization is a good or a bad thing. We think our job is to provide objective information for our members. So quick disclaimer at the outset there. The resource I want to offer you, I have a copy of it right here. Mine has stickers on it because I have a 2-year-old at home and there's just stickers everywhere. Your copy may not have stickers of it. About a year ago, I want to tell us 3 things: the story of how this book was created, what the purpose is, and who the authors are. So about a year ago, a group of, after doing programming for a year in the cannabis space, the #1 most consistent piece of feedback we received was, boy, it'd be nice if there was a central place for stakeholders to go to understand how this complicated web of laws comes together. And we said, yeah, someone ought to write a book about that. Hey, we could write a book about that. So we galvanized a group of authors in the public sector who are attorneys and regulators. And we spent a year researching, outlining, and writing what became the Cannabis Law Desk Book. It is a soup to nuts treatise on how the myriad of laws and regulations govern the cannabis markets here in the United States and domestically. I'm very proud of it. The authors are from over 12 different jurisdictions, state and local, as well as the federal Canadian government. And we have a broad chapter on illegal cannabis activity, and in particular, activity that consumers may endeavor in that's illegal behind the wheel. That's, I think, a key point that we'll probably all drill down on today. We've made a copy of that portion of the chapter available to everybody who registered. So my understanding is that'll be sent out for everyone to look to use. But as you said earlier, Darrin, the laws here change real quickly. We know that this book is going to grow and evolve with the state of affairs. So the book that you could purchase in softbound edition will be available for an annual revision, but if you are accessing it online or through Westlaw, it will be updated on an interim basis. We're really proud of our partnership with Thomson Reuters. They're our publisher. They also are objective and neutral on whether legalization is a good or a bad thing. So there was a great synergy there. And they have been kind enough to extend a discount offer for anyone who's purchasing the book today. The information's at the bottom. So, you know, I'm risking sounding a bit like a used car salesman, and I apologize for that, but we think that this resource will be valuable for anyone in the public sector that is dealing with the sea change that is cannabis reform. And we hope that you'll enjoy the book. If you get it and we got something wrong, or you spot an issue that we didn't, that we missed, please send me feedback. I think my email address will be sent around after this also. And I'm just delighted that we could be part of the discussion today, Darrin, and I look forward to when we can do this in person sometime. And I'll turn the virtual mic back to you.
Well, thank you, Austin. Appreciate your attendance here on this webinar. Next is Annie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Annie Kitch, and I work with the National Conference of State Legislatures. Despite my blurred background, I am a huge fan of NASID. I was just having some tech issues. So just happy to be here, especially with this esteemed group of panelists and these great resources, such as the resource Austin just mentioned, I'm excited to take a look at that and compare with what we're working on. So for those of you who haven't heard of or worked with NCSL, we are a bipartisan membership organization that works with legislators and legislative staff from each state, DC, and the US territories. And so when members come to us, we can provide information on a variety of policy areas from traffic safety to K through 12 education policy. And so on this slide here, we have a snapshot of our traffic safety team's webpage, which of course covers impaired driving. And notably, I want to point out that we have a variety of resources on DUI, DUIDs, and specifically drug driving. And this webpage posted here actually will send you to a map of state marijuana impaired driving laws. So states that are zero tolerance per se or under the influence DUID. And in addition to this, as Austin and Darrin mentioned, because this landscape is changing so frequently, we prioritize publishing reports throughout the year that highlight some of the latest trends when it comes to impaired driving, such as state efforts to engage more with oral fluid testing and things like that, along with, of course, as you see here, just where they stand with devices such as ignition interlock devices, things like that, to detect impairment. And so in addition to all of these resources, we also maintain a massive traffic safety legislative database that is run by LexisNexis or StateNet. And this allows any of our members or members of the public to search for traffic safety legislation dating back to 2007. So if you want to kill a couple hours, I suggest going on there, and we'll send a link out to that after this as well. And we always recommend that folks look at that, especially during these heavy legislative session seasons. And lastly, we use all of these resources to support our annual meetings, or where we bring legislators together to network and interact with folks like NASID so that they can kind of better understand the latest landscape on drug driving and DUIs. So with that, I will turn it over to Russ.
Okay, well, thanks so much. I'm Russ Martin. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Government Relations at the Governor's Highway Safety Association, or GHSA. We are the Association of State and Territorial Highway Safety Offices. Every state has a state highway safety office, and their primary role is to implement behavioral highway safety countermeasures locally throughout the state, primarily using funding from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, but sometimes with a combination of state funding as well. And our members are involved in just about all the topics we're going to talk about on today's webinar. So whether it be education, community programs, enforcement, court support, all those and so much more. As an association, GHSA has also released a number of reports specifically about drug impaired driving, polysubstance impaired driving, and the impact of cannabis legalization on highway safety. All of those reports are available on the GHSA website at ghsa.org and delve into a lot of the new best practices and cutting edge challenges that we face as a community to contend with changes in impaired driving over time. GHSA also has a number of partnerships with corporations and nonprofits to provide additional grant funding to states, specifically in the area of impaired driving. With responsibility.org, they've been gracious to provide funding to states to implement a number of impaired driving programs, most notably to increase drug recognition training for police officers. We also have a partnership, for instance, with Lyft, the ride-hailing provider, to provide ride credits and funding for designated driver programs, especially around the holidays. So there's a lot of great stuff going on out there in the States. If you are interested in what those best practices might be, I would encourage you to visit our website and check out the information there. And if you're involved locally in impaired driving programs and you don't yet know the folks in your state highway safety office, I encourage you to make that connection, because they can be a great resource for you to hopefully share some of the inside baseball on some of the specific challenges that your states might be facing and how to bridge some of those gaps. And with that, I believe I'll turn it over to Austin.
Thank you,
I'll
Russ.
gladly take two tyrants, but I'm going to hand it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Austin and Russ. My name is Andrew Bennett. As Darrin said, I am the new director of the newly created Clark County Office of Traffic Safety. Clark County is the southern portion of the great state of Nevada, where we are the 13th largest county, incorporating the world famous Las Vegas Strip and all of the traffic safety issues that come along with Las Vegas in our community. It is our strong position that we are not a resource provider, and that makes us a little unique to this webinar, but we're a community that is actively using these resources on implementing several different items that we're currently working towards and for. Right now, to talk about consumption lounges, Nevada as a state has gone through the process of legalizing marijuana and cannabis for medical use. Then it went to general legalization. We had a great conversation around eliminating our per se, which I believe Nevada is the only state that has eliminated its per se, or one of the few that's eliminated its per se around cannabis. And now we're rapidly implementing cannabis consumption lounges. Just to give you some numbers on what we are expecting to happen here in Clark County, just in the next few months, this summer we'll open up our licensing process for cannabis consumption lounges. We currently have 40 dispensaries which have the option to include a cannabis consumption lounge. And then we also have 20 independent cannabis consumption lounge licensing opportunities. So we could be looking at 60 cannabis consumption lounges within the next year here in Clark County. And so as we move forward, we had to develop a system, and it was our county commissioners, intent with creating this Clark County Office of Traffic Safety to be able to align our systems. And that's why we're coining it Safe Systems Plus or Systems Plus. We absolutely need to work on our roadways here with making sure that we do everything possible with complete streets and aligning ourselves with the Safe Systems approach. But the Clark County Office of Traffic Safety is the 39th department within Clark County. We have our police department, obviously, which is is in the top 10 largest in the country with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. But we also have organizations like comprehensive planning, zoning, business licensing, code enforcement, and then also the adjudication and prosecution arm of the county with the prosecutor's office and with the courts. And so our goal is to align all of these systems and to make sure that these 38 other departments have a focus on traffic safety, and that we're able to keep top of mind traffic safety when we have new trends coming on board, like we do with cannabis consumption lounges. So our hope with being a part of this webinar today is to provide some context about how a municipality and a county is tackling some of these issues, and to provide some real, not necessarily resource, but real-time implementation difficulties that we might be having, and how some of these resources have been beneficial to us. So with that, I'll pass it back to Darrin.
Well, thank you for all of your introductions, and each of you have different resources, lots of experience to share. And I think with you, Andrew, what you're kind of facing right now is that you will become a significant resource for many other municipalities, counties, in some of the lessons learned and some of the challenges that you have faced. But also, I think just working with the industry and working with the groups is how do we work together to prevent the fatal crashes involving any type of cannabis use or any substance use. So thank you for all of your introductions. As we go on, I just would like to, in consideration of some of the legalization in our current or even some proposed states, we would like to discuss the top 5 most important cannabis DUI policies or programs a state must consider, or I should say should consider, in preventing cannabis-impaired driving. Since 2012, I was the State Highway Safety Office Director in Washington State when we legalized recreational cannabis. I've been really working with a lot of other states and jurisdictions on the challenges legalization presents for impaired driving. Cannabis legalization at the state and federal level must consider impaired driving prevention as a top priority and must be an integral part of the discussion and not just an afterthought. And that's what I've seen with some of the state policies that I've seen, is that they get fixated on one area without really looking at the whole system of DUI and what are the impacts. So, as you look at those top 5 priorities, the implementation of specialized training, obviously for the officers, from standard field sobriety tests to advanced roadside impaired driving training to the drug recognition expert training. Now the new things with green labs where people are dosed with cannabis as volunteers and the officers can see what that looks like real time. And I think that's one of the issues here that we're all facing is many people want to equate cannabis to alcohol, and they are very, very different. Some of the expanded ways to expedite the training and the testing, the chemical testing from electronic warrants, oral fluids, as Annie was mentioning a few minutes ago, law enforcement phlebotomy programs, and then even on-site phlebotomy. Some of the processes of improving toxicology labs, implementing robust public education programs, that is a major one that needs to be put in there. And then also the collection and the analysis of data and what do we have and where are those gaps in those things. So as we look at this and these different challenges and the priorities, Annie, one of the things we often hear from state lawmakers is a desire to set a cannabis impairment standard or nanogram level. We all know the research has not yielded the standard of cannabis or any drug. So how have you worked with your policymakers to advise them on how to detect impairment?
Thanks, Darrin. That's a great question. So as I mentioned, NCSL is a bipartisan organization, so we cannot offer guidance on model legislation. However, typically a legislator or legislative staffer will contact me with a kind of more of a broad question in hopes to just better understand topics such as marijuana impaired or polysubstance impaired driving better. And so initially, we always share our inventory of state laws, such as the drug driving map that was screenshotted earlier, and certain information on disadvantages and advantages of testing to determine impairment, from oral fluid to blood analysis, which research is showing is often considered the gold standard of drug and alcohol testing because it has been leveraged longer and evaluated the most. And with all this information, we do also share that currently research shows that testing for drug impairment is challenging for a variety of reasons, but especially due to the lack of an established relationship between the concentration of a drug such as THC and the level of impairment it causes. So to put it simply, presence does not equal impairment. And I'm assuming that's something we'll most likely get into throughout this discussion. So I'll leave that there. And when we say things like presence does not always equal impairment, that can sometimes leave lawmakers feeling a little bit discouraged. And we want them to go back to their state feeling empowered and supported as they're exploring legislation and drafting legislation. So we always encourage them to reach out to key partners within their state, kind of like Russ mentioned, like the State Highway Safety Office or the Department of Public Safety or the State Toxicology Lab. And we're seeing that in some of these states like Colorado and Washington, there are already existing convened task forces that are analyzing collection of data for DUI and DUID and things like that. And so a lot of times we can connect our legislators with those task forces within other states, or sometimes they find out there's already a task force kind of brewing within my state. And so how can I just overall gain a better understanding of, one, what some of the gaps are in terms of collecting data, detecting impairment, and how can I support efforts to really formalize these next steps.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, as you said, presence doesn't equal impairment. A friend of mine, Chuck Hayes from the International Association of Chiefs of Police, he coined a phrase, there's no BAC for THC. And what we've seen, I think, as you mentioned, Annie, in the research is that there really isn't a standard for impairment. And that's something that, will we ever have one? I don't know. But for right now, there really doesn't seem to be any standard. I think, as Andrew mentioned in his opening remarks, Nevada realized that that's not a good, their 2 nanogram was not a good standard, and that was removed for their misdemeanor cases. So thank you. I mean, that's a challenge. And that's where also NASID can come in as assisting with some of the experts from the organization to help with policymakers in those arenas. So thank you. Austin, you have looked at the cannabis issue from all angles. And what do your state attorneys general need to build the right infrastructure to detect impaired driving and prevent it?
Thanks, Darrin. It sounds like what we need is a little bit of what Andrew's doing at a hyper-local, state, and national level one day. So I commend you, Andrew, and we'll be watching closely how that Systems Plus approach works. Let me just step back for a second, though, Darrin, and make sure that our listeners today and anyone watching this later understand who the AGs are individually and collectively. The AGs, they're defenders of consumers, they're independently elected in almost all states. There are a few exceptions where there's an appointed attorney general, and they have broad and strong powers. In the impaired driving context, there are a handful of AG offices that have original criminal jurisdiction. They operate as sort of your district attorney of felony cases. That's a minority position across the states. Most state AG offices advise state agencies that are charged with highway safety and enforcement. Some state AG offices will also oversee state police training boards and academies. And so there's a touch point there. I think the key for the state AG community and law enforcement generally is there are three aspects of the problem that we just can't take for granted that I want to go on the record with today. One, this type of activity is illegal. Two, it's harmful, can cause harm. And three, it's confusing. I'm not kidding you, Darrin. This happened about 15 minutes before we all logged on. I was in another meeting for something that I volunteer for. And my friend Eva was on, and she said, I told her what we were doing today. And she said, oh, I was just talking about that with some friends because we live in Massachusetts and am I allowed to smoke cannabis and drive? And I said, I don't have the time right now to explain this to you, but if you log into the NASID webinar, you'll get the answer. But the bottom line is no. And so I think that we need to start from a place of consumers being extremely confused about what they are within their legal rights to do. And some of that is we have decades of work in preventing alcohol impaired driving space, and we have to catch up overnight here in cannabis in a way that we just can't get wrong because lives are at stake. So I also won't belabor the statistics, but they're not good. I'm sure people here have read the AAA Foundation report out of your home state of Washington, Darrin, that found that post legalization, the number of fatal crashes involved with drivers who tested for THC doubled. So we know the data is there, and I think it's worth us mentioning that here. We also know that, as I said earlier, consumers are confused. Some have reported from my home state of Colorado that they think they drive better when they are using cannabis, and that is a reality that we all in the public sector community need to come to grips with, especially and those in the private sector. So we know we can do better. We must do better. There's three things that I think the state AG community need. First is clarity. Second is resources. And third is partners. And I think all three of those are right here with this alliance. So you guys are building the playbook that we may be able to adopt. On the issue of clarity, there's a handful of states that are probably going to legalize marijuana either through their legislatures or the ballot referendum process in the next year. And those states need a roadmap. If there was model legislation we could put in front of them today, that would be a game changer. The problem is that every state that has tackled this has a contextual situation, and you can't. There is no panacea. There's no silver bullet. Everything has to be tweaked to fit within the laws of that state. And so that gets to the second, or really the third piece, is which you need partners. But I'm so hopeful in this program that the people that are listening and folks like my AGs, you're not alone in this fight. And there's a lot of people that you can reach out to figure out, what went right and what went wrong in another state, and how can I apply that to my state if we see the legalization train coming. And then the third, really, I took this out of order, but the second piece is resources. As you mentioned, Darrin, and it's on the slide here, if we're going to approach drug impaired driving and really polysubstance impaired driving more aggressively, we have to take an all hands on deck approach, especially with changing evidentiary standards. And we need a suite of tools that law enforcement and prosecutors can use to get them up to speed. It's going to require resources. It's not cheap to become certified in detecting cannabis, but it can be done, and it can be done efficiently. And there are partners. You mentioned a great organization a moment ago that is available to help, the chiefs of police. So we have to get the resources at the state and local level for the people who are ultimately going to carry out the responsibility. I believe the Alliance is working on that. Your Alliance at the federal level, how we get federal dollars to flow to states and localities to address this issue. So the more resources that we can put to the situation, the better. And that includes the private sector stepping up with new technologies and new tools that we can use, but in a tested and measured way. I don't think we want to be flying by the seat of our pants on technologies that are available, but we need to look at this problem from a new lens, and that requires a public-private partnership. So I think clarity, resources, and partners is exactly what's needed here, and you guys have provided all those in spades. So that's my 2 cents on what the state AG community can do.
Well, thank you. A lot of great points there, Austin, and appreciate the insight there from what you're providing for your folks, as well as what us as an alliance can do to help support others. And that's where the key piece comes in is partnerships. And what I was sharing with some folks yesterday is collaboration and connections, because a lot of folks don't realize that there are resources out there. And that's part of what this webinar is about, is to help us to realize there are some people out there that have been through this and can help along the way. So thank you. Russ, the Governor's Highway Safety Association has been an early leader in preventing drug-impaired driving. Together, we have awarded many grants to states to build their infrastructure in this area. What do you think is the most pressing need among states to prepare for legalization, and how can states access federal highway dollars to implement essential programs?
Thank you. I'll answer the first question, the second part of your question first, in that through the state highway safety offices, they apply for grants from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to do just precisely that, to fund state and local behavioral highway safety programs to address impaired driving. So if you are if you're on the state and local level and you have a program or an idea, or you're in a law enforcement agency that is not currently participating and you're looking to access federal funding, your first stop should be your state's state highway safety office. As far as what states can do to prepare for cannabis legalization, I'd recommend 3 things. The first thing is something we've kind of already talked about, and that is to bolster your impaired driving programs in a comprehensive way. So that is enforcement, education, court support, toxicology. You have to make investments in all parts of the system at the same time. Darrin, you kind of alluded to this. If you're just doing stuff with enforcement, you're going to create a bunch of cases that can't be processed downstream and vice versa. So you have to address all the different elements of the system. And that includes also interfacing your impaired driving program with broader safe system approach thinking about how we're addressing highway safety overall, which I hope we'll talk about in a little bit during the webinar today. I think in practical terms for state policymakers, it means to authorize a lot of the things that are listed here as priorities, new kinds of programs and technologies and practices that can expedite impaired driving investigations, because when it comes to drugs, the minutes count on the roadside, help police officers collect a broader spectrum of evidence to help build a case. Since we're not really dealing with per se limits, we have to build a really strong case to prosecute these instances of drug impaired driving. And it's not on the list, but also investing in how we process these cases downstream after the conviction in terms of assessing the risk level of impaired driving offenders, getting them into a program that is tailored to their specific needs, and the supervision and treatment programs that will help prevent them from recidivating in the future. The second thing is to secure cannabis tax revenue for highway safety. So in states legalize cannabis, often they create a fund on the state level that aggregates tax revenues from the cannabis industry. And states are using those funds for a wide range of different purposes, for education, for transportation, for public safety. Because of the impact that we see cannabis legalization having on the roadway, we think a strong argument can be made to have some of that funding go towards state highway safety offices to distribute throughout the state for highway safety. The third thing I would recommend is to prepare your state to monitor the impact. That means investing in your traffic record system, investing in your toxicology and court systems to be able to take all the data about impaired driving cases so you can tell what's going on. How has the number of impaired driving cases changes? What the presence or the involvement of cannabis in the bloodstream on people that are fatally injured. This way, we'll be able to monitor what has changed before and after, and decide what the best course of action will be moving forward.
Thank you. Great points. And I will just echo what Russ just mentioned about having the resources. This goes back to Austin's one, I think his second point is having the resources, is the financial resources that agencies need for law enforcement, for education from the state highway safety offices, also for toxicology. When you look at the whole DOI system, having those resources is critical in addressing this. So I appreciate your thoughts there, Russ, in this, because those are all key points. Andrew, talk to us about your idea on how to expand and expedite chemical testing, especially among DUI suspects who refuse to be tested.
So when we had our pre-conference to discuss this webinar, there was a few items that I brought up that were that created a lively conversation just between the few of us. And I want to start with to continue the conversation about resources. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department has a grant-funded mobile phlebotomy program that's funded by the Nevada Office of Traffic Safety. And that was a great option. And we refuse to be discouraged about not being able to implement a law enforcement phlebotomy program. And I think that if there is any advice that I do have is to continue forward to try to find that solution that meets your needs. We probably won't be able to have a law enforcement phlebotomy program in our state for an extended period of time. So there was two options that were implemented immediately. The first one was the grant-funded program, again, through the Nevada Office of Traffic Safety, having that mobile phlebotomist. It's a phlebotomist that's driven around in a DUI processing van that allows officers to request that van to be able to get that roadside blood test done just by a contracted phlebotomist. Number two was our county put a contract phlebotomist within the hospital system. That way you don't come up against people refusing to do the blood tests, not on the offender side, but even on the folks that are administering those tests, whether it's nurses, firemen, EMTs, paramedics. We want to make sure that we have that opportunity to collect that data because it is time limited. When we talk about analyzing data and collecting data, I think that it's time that there is a serious conversation about moving towards all blood tests. We've had this conversation in our county and in our state for the last few weeks. We understand that would be an extreme burden on our labs. And there's a lot of, logistical process that would need to be worked out about how to move that program forward. But in Nevada, and especially in Clark County, our number one impairment is polysubstance. And unfortunately, we have a system that, allows, even if an officer, is able to obtain that intoxilizer, that evidentiary level test of 0.08 with alcohol, if they do a breath test, it ends there. We need that data. We need to be able to analyze that data. And I believe one of the only ways to properly do that is to move to a standard all blood and then a standard screening, because that'll help us understand the real issue. And it might also help us determine to be able to collect that more data, to be able to determine what a per se limit might be moving forward if you have that increased testing that's done the same way across the board. Again, there's some issues with trying to move to all blood, but we want to make sure that we have that data, we're able to collect it, and then with those programs that I mentioned at the front, making sure that we have access to that data and being able to collect that data with that blood samples. So it is one where, again, at the end of the day, in our state, DUI is the only crime that has a time limit to be able to collect data, and that's 2 hours. And so making sure that you have that opportunity to get that data so that we can make better decisions on the back end and prosecute those cases is vital.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andrew. That's, when I was in Washington, that was a huge issue that we were trying to overcome, especially with our labs. We went from a 30-day turnaround to almost a 12-month turnaround because of the increase on the labs. One thing that you also mentioned that I just wanted to kind of emphasize too is many states, when they do draw blood, if they do identify a 0.08, they stop continuing the testing. And that's another issue that I know that many resources are not available to labs to continue to do additional drug testing, but that's where we need to expand in those resources, allowing the labs to do more of that. Because can we identify that it's more than just an alcohol problem, that they may have a substance abuse problem that they're masking with alcohol, that can we help them and identify some of the needs to help them get off of those continuing problems that they have. So thank you. This question is for the group. As testing increases, so does the impact on toxicology labs. If tests aren't proceeded with in a timely manner, cases get dropped. So how do we ensure our toxicology labs are ready to manage this increase?
Well, I
I'll
can
jump
weigh
in.
in. Oh, yeah. I was going to weigh in and
Go
just say everything we've been talking about is you have to invest in capability, and just like you'd get more police officers, we need more toxicology, staff, equipment, funding. So it's really simple from that perspective.
This is a prime example with what we're trying to do with Systems Plus. Is the lab is a county function, the law enforcement's a county function, prosecution's a county function, the court system's a function as well. And so we've already had those conversations to make sure that there's a general understanding of what the turnaround time is, how to make sure that we're able to successfully prosecute these cases. And so here in the county, it's just simply creating that conversation and making sure there's a general understanding of what the current system is, and to make sure that everybody from start to finish acknowledges it and make sure that we're able to keep these cases moving forward.
Annie?
Yeah, I just want to quickly mention, this kind of goes back to the whole partnership aspect of everything. But I'd say when working with lawmakers, especially, I think, it is safe to go into your conversations with them, just starting from toxicology 101 and really honing in on what the interaction between the state and local toxicology labs looks like, so that as they're introducing legislation that will impact funding for these labs, that they have an even better understanding of some of the complications and some of the suggestions for possible solutions that this panel has offered. So
yeah, I've seen several legislative efforts, and it seems like when they're looking at the legalization, most of it is focused on training officers in ARIDE and DRE. And I've asked, I said, what's interesting is that you're going to be doing all of this front loading with training, officers get the identification, and then you stovepipe at the lab because they're not ready to take on some of those additional blood cases that they're now being trained to identify. So when we talk about that system, is what are the decisions that we're making up here, and then flowing downstream, what are those impacts? And I think that's a very important distinction in this, is helping our policymakers understand where those gaps end up being, and helping to provide the resources to address this. Because we know that for behavioral change, it's swift and certain, but with DOI, there's nothing swift or certain. And that's something that we need to make sure that we're changing in this dialogue. I want to jump to another question here. Is the U.S. Department of Transportation released a national roadway safety strategy this year that urges a more holistic systems approach that includes safer vehicles, safer roads, and safer drivers. As it relates to impaired driving, how can we utilize design, engineering, and advanced technology to prevent impaired driving?
I can start in to talk about this. I think that this is kind of like a big sort of conceptual question in a way, but I think the answer is that traffic safety by its nature is interdisciplinary. There are lots of things that we can do before, during, and after any kind of crash occurs, and all of them will have value. Even sometimes it might be very difficult to quantify that value. Often it's very expensive to get to the point where you're recording and evaluating the value of it. But we know that a lot of the things that we do to address highway safety has value. And I think that's what's so great about this new safe system approach to highway safety, is you're looking at the entire system. As you mentioned, it's not just education and enforcement or what we do in the courts. It's also infrastructure, it's EMS, it's safe vehicles. As far as infrastructure, I think of it more in terms of like the built environment. So there was a thought that I read about recently where the discussion was, we've seen some decline in impaired driving because people have more access to transit, or they have more access to a safe ride home. And I think we should all be in favor of anything that will prevent any kind of future impaired driving crash from happening, but it should be additive, because all these different approaches approach the problem in many different ways. And safe system is that we need the entire system. And you're going to hear people out there who will say things like, they'll be very dismissive of whole swaths of safety programs, they will say enforcement doesn't work or education doesn't work, or we need to put all of our eggs into one basket. That is not safe systems thinking. We need to be investing in everything all at the same time, because that's really the only way we're going to be able to address every kind of circumstances that lead to a crash.
Yes. Anybody else?
Real quickly, to jump kind of onto echo what Russ brought up, we're currently only investigating fatalities here in Clark County for criminality. We're not investigating them where there's not a parallel investigation to look at how we could have redesigned that road to prevent these from happening, or even looking at the circumstances leading up to these crashes. We're working on a program through our business licensing. We're modeling it off of California's TRACE program, where they use their ABC division to trace back where alcohol is provided. We also lead the nation in impaired pedestrian fatalities. And again, making sure that we work with, the impairment providers, whether it's going to be cannabis or alcohol, and then making sure that our roadway supports those. Currently, our system does not, and that's where we look to take that report, and again, from start to finish, reevaluate the entire system so that we can have a safety outcome.
I think you're going to start seeing stuff like that all across the country beginning in the next few years, is that we're going to start looking at greater context. It's not just about what we're doing in the courts or what law enforcement is doing or things like that, but you have to take into account changes that we're making in transportation, changes in the availability of emergency medicine. All these things can factor into how we plan our highway safety systems more broadly. And it might be that impaired driving, we're used to operating in a very, what we're now seeing is a really well-defined silo. Perhaps it didn't seem so much, considering so much is in it, but it's still a silo. And I think we're going to be seeing a lot more breaking of that silo in the future. And I think that this can be cooperative. It's not necessarily competitive. It should be helping us all together, get to a better place.
Well, thank you. I'd like to, because we're running out of time, but I would like to take some questions from that have come up in our question and answers box here. Christiana, did you have a couple there that you would want to pull up? I will. We'll go back up in just a second, but
Yes.
there was one. There was just one question. Go ahead.
There's one regarding the HALT Act, and it says, with the greatest respect for education, enforcement, engineering, and EMS, when will the HALT Act begin to impact with safer vehicles?
That's a great question. And Russ, I don't know if you want to take that. That's been your baby.
Yeah, sure. So for those who aren't familiar, as part of the recently passed infrastructure bill, it incorporated legislation known as the HALT or the RIDE Act that requires NHTSA to make some sort of passive impairment detection technology as standard equipment in all vehicles, or to pass a rule to make that so within 3 years. In other words, they have to finalize the rule within 3 years. It's a very exciting development where I think the vision is for it to be passive technology that will automatically detect whether you're impaired, and theoretically the car wouldn't even start. And that has obviously a tremendous potential to prevent a lot of impaired driving from happening if you literally can't even start the car. The question is, how do we get from here to there? NHTSA has a 3-year deadline to develop the rule and finalize it. But even if they meet that deadline, what's the average age of car on the road today? It's 12 or 13 years, something like that. So we're probably looking at a long timeline to turn all that over and get all this technology out there into the vehicle fleet. But I think from our perspective, what we really need to happen is for NHTSA to expedite its process to develop that technology that we know will probably be able to make a lot of good, or do a lot of good.
Yeah, and that is one of the elements, from NASID, is looking at all of the different elements that we can to reduce, to eliminate impaired driving, from technology, from training to, all the different facets. So that is one thing that we're looking forward to seeing, is how that technology can be applied in the vehicles in the future. One other one, Christiana.
Yeah, another one had to do with the 5 priorities. They said, with that, what is your opinion on states about to legalize marijuana without having any of the 5 priorities even stated or started?
That's a good question. Every state is required to have an impaired driving committee. or panel or working group in their state highway safety office. That might be a starting point, is looking at and maybe even analyzing where are we in preparations for legalization, and then what are the gaps? What are the issues that we need to be working on right now? But is there some areas where there's barriers? Are there policymakers that need to be put into place that kind of understand where this is coming from? How can NASID help you in that development as well? We do provide some technical support to states, and we can support in those arenas. So if there's an area there, I would be happy to speak to, I think from wherever the question came from, we can talk about that in a lot more detail in addressing that, because there are some states that are, when legalization started, I would say we were way behind the 8 ball when things happened. Then we kind of got it. We had to expedite a lot of things through. So it's much better to be proactive than it is to be reactive. And so that's just some things to consider. Anybody else on the panel want to mention anything about that one?
I think I can weigh in on that for a second, Darrin, which is just to double down on what you said. If you're in a state where you think the legalization train is coming to your station, the best thing that you can do is engage. If you're in the traffic highway safety community or the law enforcement community, you need to come to the table. Even if you don't agree with the outcome that you think might happen, you have to come to the table to listen to what the stakeholders are saying. And at a minimum, you can help shape the direction in which the laws are changed. If you don't show up, like all democracies, it's a participation sport. If you don't show up, you're not going to be involved in the outcome. So I just recommend everybody to get involved in that process, especially if you're in a position in which you can help protect public health and safety, which is what I'm assuming everyone on this call is concerned about.
Thank you. One more, Christiana.
Yeah, so is there any state level or federal level funding for THC detection technologies or clinical studies? If so, is there a database where this information can be located?
That I am not. I know that for THC detection under federal would be precluded. Under state, there might be some options depending on the state and the legal is, if they're legalized or not, and some of those rules, but I am not familiar with any right off the top of my head.
I might be able to add something to that really quickly, just more to the database aspect.
Mhm.
My team will be tracking, like if a state bill comes through that's allocating any sort of funding for new technologies, that will be included in our database, whether it is just pending or it's been enacted. And as I mentioned, that's something that'll come out after this. So, and please feel free to follow up with me after too, if you have any questions just on the research side of that, and if I can find anything.
Thank you. Christiana, if you could go back up, or Casey could go back up to slide 13. Just quickly before we conclude, we just wanted to share a few thoughts about updating DUI laws to include cannabis. Some of the things that we have seen around the states that, when states are beginning to legalize, is to making sure that it's it's listed in their implied consent warnings, laws that apply to cannabis. Sometimes that really relies just or refers specifically to alcohol, but also making sure that it relies to cannabis as well. There's also any chemical test refusals to be admissible in trial, another area. Also looking at screening, assessing, and treating cannabis DUI offenders. There's, it's just like any other substance. We need to be able to make sure that we're screening and providing assessments to them. And then prohibit open containers of cannabis in motor vehicles, and setting the age, setting 21 as the minimum age for consumption. There are some medical exceptions in that. And then a 0 per se level for people under 21. Granted, there are maybe some potential medical exceptions to that one as well. But for the group, is there any thoughts on any of these that you'd like to share?
I will share that what strikes me from a lot of from things listed on the screen is that I think that what we're aiming to do is to thoughtfully but effectively create an environment for cannabis that is comparable to the environment that we built up around alcohol. And that has led to social norms about drinking and driving and underage use, and got us to where we are today, which is a better place. It's, of course, it's not ideal, and certainly there's a lot of work to be done, but it's certainly better than it was 50 years ago. So start thinking about that in respect to cannabis, is how can we create that kind of environment and that traffic safety culture, really, that will hopefully lead people to make good decisions and set up the rule set that we need.
Thank you.
I'll just add to what Russ has said, which we've drilled down a couple of times, but since we're concluding, if you're in a state and the legalization train is coming, you're working on legislation, you can take marijuana tax revenue and invest it in things like public health awareness campaigns and like the resources that are needed for law enforcement and prosecutors. So that tax allocation has happened in other jurisdictions. It's a possibility for anyone that is looking at what's happening to the future of their state. And so, maybe that's underneath and supporting all of these on the screen here, but you can take your marijuana tax revenue or a portion of it and invest it in a lot of things. But two that you should not overlook is public health awareness and data surveillance and combating drug impaired driving.
Thank you both for your responses. If you go to the next slide, I would like to just invite all of you, 850 of you that are on this call. We are having the National Alliance to Stop Impaired Driving is having a multiple substance impaired driving conference on July 27th and 29th in Washington, D.C. The registration link is here, as well as information. They'll take you right to NASID.org. And what we have done, we did this in July of last year, is we kind of made a formal launch of NASID and really looked and drilled down and explored some of the issues and challenges around the multi-substance impaired driving pieces. Again, we will be convening the national experts in this arena, from education all the way through treatment, rehabilitation, adjudication, all those elements, and really looking at some of the issues. And for those of you that, like the question that was asked earlier about, well, we haven't even started to even look at these top 5, many of those issues will be addressed. We'll have a policy makers roundtable to kind of look at and how we work through these issues. So here's just the invitation card. We'd love to have all of you in attendance with us. Just as far as the webinar, we will be providing a post-webinar email, which will include the PowerPoint. It will include resources from all of the speakers today that they have mentioned or referenced, as well as their contact information. A lot of good information will also be added into this webinar, so make sure you don't miss that. It's a good thing that you registered, so you get all those extra bonus features that we'll provide for you. But for all of you that did register, it is recorded, and you can go back and listen to any of the sections that you'd like to. I would like to really thank all of our panelists today for your expertise, your willingness to be on this, the insights, as well as being some resources here in the future for many that are on this call to address some of the challenges that they're facing. So please follow NASID on social media, and please consider signing up as a member of NASID to stay up to date on our activities and resources to eliminate impaired driving and saving lives. We hope to see you at the NASID conference in July. And with that, this will conclude today's webinar. Stay safe, and we appreciate your participation today. Thank you.